Hi, this is Chuck Vosburgh, and in this lesson we're going to learn all about layers. Layers really makes everything possible in Photoshop, and I'd like to point out the Layers panel to you right here. You might notice that in this particular project we have a background layer, which we can definitely see, but there are some other layers in this project that we're not seeing right now. So I'd like to show you here in these layers. Each layer has a little square next to it where we can turn the eyeball on or off, and that way we can see or hide the layers. So I'm going to go in here and turn most of these layers on by clicking where the little eyeball goes, and you can see here that these layers kind of stack up in a certain order. The shell is in front of the wrinkled paper, for example, and this letter is also in front of the wrinkled paper. And if you look over here in the Layers panel, you'll see that as these stack up, the letter is above the paper texture in the stack. The shell is above both the letter and the paper texture. And if we want to change these, we simply drag them. So I'm going to take this letter layer, grab it by its little thumbnail view here, this little preview square, and drag it underneath the paper texture. So that changes how these stack up. I'll take the shell, drag it underneath the paper. You can see how this works. Well, now I'll put these back where they were originally by simply dragging them. It's really easy to manage your layers here in the Layers panel. Now, one thing that you need to know is that if we want to take the Move tool and move this shell, for example, simply clicking on it isn't enough. We have to make sure we're on the layer that has the shell on it. So I've clicked on the shell layer here in the Layers panel to select it. Now I can move the contents of that layer, which in this case happens to be the shell. Same is true of the letter. If I want to move it, I have to be on the layer that has the letter on it. So at this point, you're probably wondering, how did these layers get in here in the first place? Well, I'm going to show you. Usually all these start off as separate documents, and these did. The background, the wrinkled paper, and the letter, well, those were all scanned in on a scanner. The shell was a digital picture. Well, let's bring another layer in. I'm going to go to the File menu to open. I have a picture in here that we'd like to include in this document. And here it is. We've got an old photograph that we'd like to include. And in order to get this in there are several ways of doing it. But I think the easiest way is to first make a selection of the area that we want to use. Get a nice accurate selection of this. And you can go under the Edit menu and choose Copy. And we can close this picture because we're finished with it. And then paste it by going under Edit into this document. And you can see here it comes in on its own layer automatically. Which layer it comes in above depends on which layer happened to be selected when I pasted this new layer in. Now, of course, it really doesn't matter because I can grab it and move it very easily. But in this case, it's right where I want it in the stacking order. So I'm going to go to my Move tool and move this into place. Now I'll click on the shell layer and put the shell where I'd like it. Now back to the layer that has the people on it, the old photograph. You'll notice when I pasted this in, it was assigned a generic name, Layer 1. Well, I'm going to double click right on that name, Layer 1, and type in a name that makes sense. It's a good idea to name your layers as you're working so that later on when you're working on your project, you'll be able to tell what's what. Because these little tiny thumbnail previews are really too small to be able to see what's on the layer. Well, now I've got my layers all in here and I've got them arranged the way I'd like them. I'd like to point out to you that we can actually control how these layers interact with whatever's underneath them. For example, I'd like this paper texture layer to kind of blend in with the background nicely, rather than just laying on top of it. And there are a couple ways we can control this. One way is up here in the top of the Layers panel. We can change the opacity of the layer. You can see here as I move this opacity slider down, this is becoming more and more translucent. So that's one way that we can control how this layer interacts with what's underneath it. And then the other way, and perhaps a more exciting way, are called blending modes. Now this little pop-up menu up here in the top of the Layers panel controls it. You can see it says normal right now. Well, the normal way that layers work is that they hide whatever's underneath them. But this is a pop-up menu, so if I click, there are many other ways that we can control how this interacts with whatever's underneath. So let me just try out a few of these. You can see we've got a lot of choices here. I recommend just going through the choices and trying them out to see what looks good to you. I kind of like this one, Overlay. So I've chosen Overlay as a blending mode, and even though I've got a different blending mode, I can still go over here to the opacity and control its opacity so that I've really got complete control over how this layer acts with whatever's underneath it. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. I like that. You know what would make this shell look really nice? Is a little shadow underneath it. That would really make it look realistic. So I'm going to click on the shell layer and direct your attention down to the bottom of the Layers panel to the FX button. Under FX, there are a number of special effects, and the one we're going to use here is called Drop Shadow. The Drop Shadow dialog box came up, and it's very adjustable. The opacity is how dark the shadow is going to be. The distance is how far the shadow is from the subject. The spread I've found practically useless, but you can experiment with it. And the size controls how blurry the shadow is going to be. Finally, the angle is the angle at which the light source would be coming from. Totally adjustable. Now I'm going to click OK on this, and you'll notice over here on the shell layer a little effects symbol has been added along with a list of the effects that are applied to this layer. And in this case it's a drop shadow. They have little bitty eyeballs next to them so you can turn the view on and off to see the before and after. And if you change your mind and want to adjust these, you can simply double click and it brings up the dialog box once again so that you can make further adjustments. So it stays live all the time. Dealing with layers in Photoshop's actually really simple, and you can use these techniques to make very nice composites of several different photographs. Now there's one other thing I'd like to show you in this lesson. It's not really related to layers exactly, but this would be a good time for us to have a quick discussion on adding text to your document. So I'm going to click on my layer that has the letter on it, and I'm in the Move tool, so I'll move this down a bit. So I've got some room to add some text. I think I'll zoom in with my zoom tool a notch or two so we can see this more clearly. And I'd like to add some text. Text in Photoshop's really simple. I'm going to go to the Text tool in the toolbox, right here, T for text. And the way it works is you just simply click where you'd like your text to begin and then type in the text you want. The text is going to come in whatever style and size was last used on the computer, but we can change it easy enough. You can click and drag across this text to select it, but I've got a little problem here because my text is running right off the edge of the document and I can't even see it. So there are a couple tricks. You can double click on a word to select just the word. You can triple click to select a whole line of text. If you quadruple click, that selects a whole paragraph, although it's unlikely that you'd have a whole paragraph of text on a picture. Well, now that I have my text selected, it can be affected. So I'll go to the top to the options bar. We can change the type style here if we want to. We can change the weight of the type style if it has any available, and also the size of the text. So I'll adjust the size here a little bit. One thing that's interesting in Photoshop is anything that has a number in a field, if you go right next to the field, you get what the folks at Adobe call a scrubby slider, and you can actually click and drag next to that field and adjust the text visually. I think that's a really great thing. Now this little pop-up here for crisp, strong, sharp, and so forth, that's for web developers, and if you're a web developer, you may have heard of these. Next over is the alignment, left, centered, and right, and that's all based on the place where you clicked. This little black square right here, that brings up the color picker, so we can choose a color if we'd like. And I'll show you these other two boxes in just a moment. So make sure I'm in my text tool. I'm going to click here and break this into two lines. One thing that's kind of nice about this text is you can go to the Move tool and you can move it around. But one thing that most people don't know is that you can go to the Edit menu and choose Free Transform, and you can free transform text if you like. And that includes rotating it. I'm going to press Escape to get out of that because I like the size already, but I just wanted to show you that. These special effects, the FX button down in the bottom of the Layers panel, those can apply because our text comes in on its own layer. So I'm going to click on the Effects button and add a drop shadow. Alright, that looks nice. Of course, you can experiment with some other special effects on your own if you like. But now you can see I've got some special effects added to this layer. Well, this is looking really great so far, but there's even more. I'm going to go back to my text tool and quadruple click to get my whole little paragraph of text selected. And I'd like to point out this button right here, which brings up even more options for your text. You've got the size, the amount of space in between a pair of characters, also known as kerning, the amount of space in between the lines of text, which is known as leading, and finally the tracking, which is the amount of space in between the letters. You also have scaling on the vertical and horizontal axis, and the ability to move letters up or down relative to the baseline. So let me go back over here to the options bar and show you my favorite. This button right here brings up the Warp Text box, and you can actually choose these different methods of distorting your text. And it's completely adjustable too. Adjust the bend a little bit. And the distortion if you like. It's possible to make your text completely illegible with this, so be careful. That looks pretty good, so I'll click OK. And to get this text deselected, I think the easiest way is to just switch to the Move tool, because that's the next thing we need to do anyway, is move this into place. You can see that building a really interesting document is very easy in Photoshop once you know how to use layers.